What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create a Discord bot with buttons and menus without real coding. So we're going to be using a website called Scratch for Discord. The link will be down in the description. If you don't know what Scratch for Discord is, it's basically a website you can use to make a Discord bot with Scratch styled blocks. So it makes it really easy to start coding a Discord bot if you're a beginner. If you're new to Scratch for Discord or just coding a Discord bot in general, I highly recommend you to watch some tutorials down below on my channel to get started. All the videos I recommend you to watch before watching this one will be in the description. So I'm going to be showing you how to do this with slash commands. If you want to use text commands, I'll have two tutorials linked down below because I have one tutorial showing how to create buttons in text commands and another tutorial on how to create menus in text commands, but this is kind of an updated version of how to do it with slash commands. I highly recommend you to watch the slash command tutorial if you want to create slash commands yourself too, but if you want to just have a text command, you can also do that, which I also have tutorials for on my channel. So I'm going to head over to links and click register slash commands. So I'm going to create a new command and I'm just going to call it tutorial, and the description can be whatever you want, and click create. And I'm going to have 3 subcommands for this, and the reason I created 3 subcommands is because I'm going to be showing you 3 different examples of how you could do this. Since this video is about menus and buttons combined, I'm going to show one command which will be for just buttons by themselves, and another command will be just one menu, and the third command will be menus and buttons combined in one message. So it's going to be /tutorial1, /tutorial2, and /tutorial3. So to get started actually coding this, go over to the interactions category and click the slash commands. Scroll down until you see this block when a slash command is received, and bring over an if statement to check the command. So drag over an equal sign, and in the slash category, drag over the interaction name and a text block, and this will be the name of the command. So the name of my command is /tutorial, but don't include the slash though. And then we're going to have another if statement, and this will check the subcommand. So you can go over to slash and bring over the get string option name, but instead of string we're going to change the drop down to subcommand, and we're going to check if the subcommand is equal to 1. And then if you click this blue settings icon, you can drag over an else if and drag over another one, because I'm going to have 3 subcommands. Obviously this will probably be different for you because you're not creating the exact same command I am. But since I have 3 subcommands, I'm going to have to check 3 times for the subcommand. So I'm going to duplicate this into each of these slots, and it's going to be subcommand 2 and subcommand 3. And again, if you're confused by any of this, my tutorial on slash commands covers it. But in summary, basically the yellow block when a slash command is received, anything inside this yellow block will run whenever someone runs any slash command on your bot. So no matter how many slash commands in total you have, whenever a user runs any slash command at all, anything inside the yellow block will run. So we have to check if the interaction name is equal to tutorial. So if you have a bunch of different slash commands, you're probably going to have a bunch of these event blocks, depending on how many commands you have, or you can just have it in one single event block and just duplicate the if statement. But what this is basically doing is just seeing which command the user ran. So if they ran the tutorial, then we have to check what subcommand they ran. So if the user runs /tutorial1, whatever is inside here will run, 2 will run anything inside here, and 3 will run anything inside here. So in the slash category, we're going to drag over this block right here, interaction reply, and this block replies to the slash command. In this circle right here, we can have a text block, and this will be the message, just the text of the message, and it can be anything you want. And I'm just going to say tutorial1, And this can also be an embed. If you go over to embeds and create an embed and put an embed here, and then you go over to slash commands and drag over the send embed. But I'm just going to keep it simple and do a text block. And I already have a tutorial on how to create embeds in Scratch for Discord, so those will also be linked in the description if you want to check it out. If you don't know what ephemeral means, you can go over to logic and drag over the true or false block. If the ephemeral is false, then it will just be a regular message. If you've used Discord bots, you've probably seen this before. So if you set it to true, that means the message is ephemeral, which basically means the message will only be visible to you, and it's going to have a sort of blue highlight thing, so no one else will be able to see it. But if it's false, it's just going to be a regular message. So I'm going to leave it as false. The next thing we're going to do is go to the buttons category, and we're going to be using the Mr. Rito blocks. There are 3 different categories in this in total. You can technically use either one, but I prefer the Mr. Rito ones since I just think they're the easiest to use. So this first subcommand will show the command that only has buttons. Like I said before, we're going to have 3 different subcommands, and one will show only buttons, the other will show only menus, and the third will show both of them combined. So we can go over to the Mr. Rito category and scroll down until you see this block right here, the create button row. And the name of the button row, this doesn't really matter what you name it as long as you know what it means, because this will not be shown to the user. The user won't be able to see this, so it's basically just a way to name it in the code. So I'm just going to name it row 1. So if you go over to Mr. Rito category again, inside the button row, we're going to have add button, and this is the button name. So whatever you want to name the button, again, it doesn't really matter. The user won't be able to see this. And so I'm just going to name it button 1. And I'm also going to have a second button called button 2. And you can have a single button in a row. You can have a few. I'm pretty sure there's a limit to how many buttons you can have in one row. And then we're gonna use this green block, create button, and we're actually gonna have this before the row. Make sure it's on top of the row, because it won't work if you create the button after you make the row. So the button name will be whatever you put the name as over here. Button 1, so this will be button 1. And if you click this blue settings icon, you can check all of these things. Those basically just adds more options to create the button with. So for the label, you can drag in a text block, and the label is the actual title or label that's shown on the button. So this is what the user will see, and this is what the user will click. So I'm gonna name it button 1, and the style, you can go over to the Mr. Rito category again and drag in this button style. This lets you choose the color of the button. So it can either be blurple, which is kind of Discord's main color, just the main color of Discord, like a bluish purple thing. It can be gray, green, red, or it can be a link, and I'll talk more about the link later in a moment. So I'm gonna leave this color as blurple, and for the emoji, you can drag in a text block. And if you don't know, on Windows, you can hold the Windows logo and the period key at the same time to bring up this emoji picker. So I'm just going to choose the emoji 1. And the button URL, if you set this to a color, you have to leave this empty, because the URL won't do anything if you selected blurple, gray, green, or red as the button style. It'll only work if you set this as link. So if the button style is link, again, you've probably seen this before if you've used other Discord bots, but the link button style basically makes it gray, but next to it, it has like a little box with an arrow indicating that it's a link, and you can click it to take you to a certain website. So if the button style is set to link, you have to have a URL, and that's the URL the user will go to when they click on the button. But if you have it set as anything else, you can't put any URL, because the URL won't do anything since the link is not selected in the style. And the ID of the button, that's also something the user will not see. It's just a thing for the code. And this can actually be the same as the name of the button, so I'm just going to keep it the same, button 1. And also something to keep in mind about the ID, Just like if you have any of this color selected, you can't have a URL, but if you have link selected, you can't have an ID. So it won't do anything if you have an ID and you have link set. So basically you can either have the URL or the ID set one at a time. You can't have both of them set in one button. So if you have a link, then you're gonna have a URL but no ID. But if you have any of the colors selected, you're gonna have a URL. You're gonna have an ID but no URL. And again, the ID doesn't matter. I'm just gonna keep it the same as the button name to keep it more organized. And the button disabled circle, that's going to be another true or false, and that makes it so if it's disabled, if it's set to true, then the user will not be able to click on the button. It'll be kind of grayed out and disabled. So I'm going to set it to false, and then I'm just going to right click on this green block and click duplicate to create our second button, and then put the second button right below the first button. So this is going to be button 2, and the text is going to be button 2. And for the second button, I'm going to make it a link to show you guys how it's different in a link style. And this will be a link emoji. And the button URL is what the user will go to when they click on the URL. So I'm just going to make it https google.com. And we don't have an ID because the style is set to link. And then here in the row, we're going to have a text block, and we're going to type in row 1, which is the name of our row that we created here. So to understand this in summary, you can start from here and kind of go down the hierarchy to make sense of it. So it replies the text tutorial 1, it's not ephemeral, and the row it uses is row 1. So it uses the row called row 1. So it uses this row right here, which is row 1, and that row has 2 buttons inside it, button 1 and button 2. So the first one in the row is going to be button 1, and then it's going to show button 2. So that's basically it for this command. Now we're going to create the second subcommand, which is just the menu by itself. So I'm going to duplicate this interaction reply block because it's basically the same. It's just going to be tutorial 2 instead of 1, and I'll actually make this ephemeral just to show you different examples of what it could look like. And the buttons and menus, it doesn't matter if it's ephemeral or not, by the way. If it's ephemeral, it's still going to show any message components you put on there, and it'll work the same way. And I'm also going to duplicate this row. So now we have to go over to the menus category, and unlike the buttons, the menus don't have subcategories inside it, so there's just one single category for it instead of having 3 different for it. So in the menus category, we're going to scroll down, and the menus work a little bit differently. Instead of creating a row separately and creating buttons separately, we're just going to delete this text block, and we're going to just drag this row right into the row. So this block basically just creates a row already, but instead of creating it separately like you do in buttons, we just put it directly inside the row. The menu ID, this will be a text block, and again, this won't be visible to the user, so I'm just going to name it menu 1. And the placeholder, if you don't know what a placeholder is, it's kind of like in websites when you have a text input and like where you type something, but when the text input is empty and you don't type anything yet, there's a little grayed out text below it, basically like showing context of what you should type there maybe. And the second you type anything, that text goes away. That's what the placeholder means. But in menus, it's a little different. The placeholder text is going to show when nothing is selected. So if nothing is selected in the menu, it will show the placeholder. And when you select something, it's going to show whatever is selected. So the placeholder will be select 1. And the menu disabled is the same thing as the button disabled, so that will also be false. And inside this block is going to be the different options for the menu. So we can scroll down in the menus category, and this green block, create button menu, we're going to drag inside of this row. And again, if you go over to the settings, you should check all of these values. The description is going to be like a little small text below the label, and this can be a little longer than the label, basically just a description of the option. So I just filled in these values. The label is the actual title, just like the button label. It's going to be the main text of the option, and there's also an emoji. and the ID again can be anything you want, but keep in mind these IDs will be used later in the code. If you want to have the buttons or menus actually do something, if you want them to have functionality, you do have to remember these ID values. So I wouldn't recommend just naming it like whatever you want, just like random letters. It should be meaningful and you should know what the IDs actually are. So to keep it organized, I just named the ID menu1 option 1 because the name of the menu is menu1 and this is the first option. I'm gonna create 3 options for this menu, so just duplicate the block and then change the text a little. So I created 3 different options. In my opinion, these menus are a little easier to understand than the buttons because inside the row you can just think of this whole thing as one single row and one single menu, and this is the information of the menu in general. Like the whole menu ID is menu1, and the placeholder for the menu is select 1 and if it's disabled or not. And then the things inside that menu, each of these green blocks are each option, and each of these green blocks will be a single option that you can select from the menu. And now finally, the third subcommand, this is going to be the menu and buttons combined into one message. This actually isn't as easy as you might think, because in Scratch for Discord, as far as I know, there's no way to have multiple rows in one message, but I figured out kind of a workaround for that. So I'm going to drag in the interaction reply block again, and this is going to be tutorial 3, and I'm not going to make this one ephemeral, so ephemeral is going to be false. I did make the second one ephemeral just to show you guys what it looks like if you don't already know. So the buttons will basically be the same as they were before, so I'm just going to duplicate all of these buttons and drag them in the third subcommand. So now I have 2 buttons, and I'm also going to drag over the row. So the buttons are basically exactly the same as they were before, but for the menus we're going to have to do it a little differently. And by the way, ideally you should have a different ID for each of these. Like in the first subcommand, the IDs and names are button 1 and row 1 and button 2. So these buttons should technically be something else, anything that makes sense to you, but I'm just gonna leave it as it is because it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this tutorial. But if you're doing this on your own bot, I highly recommend you to create a unique ID for each of your buttons and each of your rows. So for the menu, last time like we just put it directly in the row. From the menus we just dragged it into the row. But we can't do this for here because we actually need multiple rows, and if we put this in here, it's just gonna have one row. And by the way, you can't have menus and buttons on the same row. A single menu needs its own separate row. So you can have 2 or 3 buttons in one single row, but you can only have 1 menu in one row. So if you have a menu in the single row, that row can't have any more buttons or any more menus or anything. But you can still have up to 3 buttons in another row, because menus are a little wider, so they can't fit anything else in the same row. So instead of putting this directly in here like we did before, we're actually going to create a variable. So go over to variables here and click create variable, and you can name the variable whatever you want. I'm going to name it menu, and then you drag the set menu block below the row, or it doesn't really matter if you set the variable before you create the buttons or if you do it after you create the row. But we're gonna set the menu to the actual menu block from the menus category, so we're gonna use this in the variable. So instead of putting this directly in here, we're going to create a variable and set the variable to the menu row. And this is going to be the exact same thing as before. So I'm actually going to delete this and right click this whole thing and click duplicate. So I'll just have the same menu from here. So I'm going to change the menu ID to make it menu 2, and you can change these options if you want. And if this happens, sometimes when you duplicate stuff in Scratch for Discord, it has this weird glitch where the text overflows. It doesn't really affect anything in the code, you can just leave it like this. But if it's really bothering you, you can just click once inside it and then click away. So that'll just automatically fix it. So now we have the exact same menu that we had here, but it's in a variable instead of being directly in here. So now in the row, we're gonna have a text block, and in the text block, we're gonna have the name of the 2 rows. So the first row is called row 1 and the second row is menu. So whatever you set the variable name to, you put the second row as the variable name. So I named it menu. So I'm going to say row 1, comma, space, menu. And you can add as many rows as you want. Of course, there's a limit in Discord, but you can have quite a few rows in one message. So now the commands are all done. This is all the code we need for the commands. But now I'm going to show you how to actually make the components functional when you click on them. So for that, we need another event. So it's kind of like this when a slash command is received, but instead of a slash command, it's going to be a menu or button. So I'll start with the buttons. If you go over to the buttons category, and we use the Mr. Rito blocks. So in the Mr. Rito category, we're going to use this event when a button is clicked. And it's kind of going to be similar to what we did with the slash command. We're going to have an if statement, but instead of the interaction name this time, we're going to use the button ID. So this is why we created the button IDs before. It's just to identify which button is being clicked basically in the code. And we put a text block in here. So you can see it's similar to what we did in here, but instead of interaction name, we're checking the button ID. So you can see the IDs you created. So you can say if the button ID is button 1, then that means this button is being clicked. And inside here, you can do whatever you want. You can use any blocks you want. You can also reply to the button. So it's kind of like how if you run a slash command, the bot replies to the slash command. The bot can also reply to buttons when you click on them. So if you go over to the Mr. Rito category again, and there's this button reply block, make sure not to use this block, the regular reply. Don't use this block, but instead use the button reply block. So if you drag in the button reply, it does the same thing basically as the interaction reply, but instead of replying to the slash command, it's going to reply to the button. So you can put whatever text you want. I'm going to say you just clicked button 1, and maybe I'll have it as ephemeral. And if you don't want any rows on it, you can just leave this blank. I'm not going to have any rows on it, but if you wanted to add even more message components, you could have that too. Just use the same steps that we had before. And then you can either duplicate this whole if statement and put it below this, and then change the button to button 2 and change the text. Or a more efficient way of doing it is if you click this settings icon and drag in an else if, and then duplicate the equal sign and drag it in here and change it to whatever other ID you want. So we actually don't have a button 2 ID because you can see button 2 is actually a link. So for link buttons, you can't have any functionality for them. So that's why they don't have IDs. So if you set the button style to a link, you cannot have an ID. You can only have a URL. And so even if you had the ID set to button 2 or something, it's not going to do anything. So when the button is clicked, all it will do is lead to this website, and it's not going to trigger this event at all. So just keep that in mind when you create your own bot. You can either have a link button that leads you to a website, or a regular button that has some functionality. You can't have both. So that's for the first command. And the second command, I also have a few buttons, or not the second command, I mean the third command that has buttons and menus combined. I also have button 1 here and button 2 here. They're actually the exact same buttons. So the ID for this one is the exact same as the ID for this one. So it doesn't matter which one you click, both of them will trigger the same event because they have the same IDs. But you just have to make sure that each button, if the buttons do separate things, then they should have unique IDs. Actually, just to show you guys, I'm just gonna change the button ID of this to button 3, just so I can have different responses for each, just to show you guys how it works. So this will be button 3, and we can duplicate this here. And this will be the exact same thing, but I'm going to make it not ephemeral. And this is just to show you guys that the two buttons have two different things because they have different IDs. So in /tutorial 1, if they click the first button, then it'll reply an ephemeral message. And the button 2 is a link, so it won't do anything except go to the website. and in slash tutorial 3 we're gonna have a button with the ID of button 3, and that's gonna respond with a non-ephemeral message. And again, like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if the button name and button ID are different. So this is still button 1, but this is button 3. But it's a good practice to leave them the same just to keep it organized. So I'm just gonna rename this to button 3, and then you have to update the button name in this one too. So instead of button 1, it's gonna be button 3, and button 2 will just leave it the same because it's the exact same thing as the other button 2 here. So for menus, it's a little more complicated to add functionality. There's no supported way to add functionality to menus for slash commands. If you go to menus, there's this block when a menu is clicked by a member, but unfortunately you can't just put this inside the command because this is only supported for text commands. So if you want to have functionality for your menu but you still want to use slash commands, we're going to be doing it a little differently. So instead of using this event block from the menus, we're actually going to use the slash command event block, the one we used before when a slash command is received. And this kind of also works for the menus, because when a slash command is received and when a button is clicked and when a menu is clicked, they're all basically the same events because they're all counted as interactions in Discord. It's just that slash command is one type of interaction, button is another type of interaction, and menus are another type of interaction. But they technically all still use the same event, because if you go to the JavaScript, you can see when a slash command was received event, it's doing the interaction create event. And this is a little more technical if you know a little more about JavaScript. If you don't know about JavaScript, you can just ignore this explanation. So when a slash command is received, it's doing interaction create, and also when a button is received, it's doing the exact same event, interaction create. So it doesn't really matter which one of them you use, they just have different named blocks just to make it easier for beginners to understand. So when a slash command is received, you can just kind of ignore this text and pretend it says menu because it does the exact same thing. So in the if statement, we would have, if this was a text command and if you use this block, we could just have the ID from the menus. But since this isn't really supported in Scratch for Discord, the slash commands, we're gonna have to do it a little differently. So we're gonna have to insert our own code into here. So you can go over to others and use this insert code block. So these three blocks are basically ways to just insert your own code, your own JavaScript code. If for some reason something you want to do is not supported in Scratch for Discord, but you still want to use Scratch for Discord, you can just have one of these three blocks to insert your own custom code to make something work. So we're going to be using this circle block right here. You could use the three different blocks for different things. So the square one you can put like anywhere in the code, and the one that looks like it can connect to others, you're supposed to put connecting between blocks. And the circle one we're gonna use because we're gonna put inside the if statement right here. So in the insert code, we're gonna say interaction dot ID. So make sure it's the exact same thing as mine, interaction period ID, and with no spaces or anything, and all lowercase. And again, hopefully they'll add this support to Scratch for Discord in the future so we don't have to do all these workarounds. But for now, we're just gonna have to do this if you want to use slash commands, or you can just use text commands and do it the way that it is supported, and use this in text commands if you want. If you don't want to use slash commands, if you just want to use text commands, you can just use the regular menu blocks from here. And again, I have a tutorial for those down in the description below on how to do it with text commands instead. So we're going to be checking if the interaction ID is equal to whatever ID you set for the menu in here. So we set the menu ID to be menu 1, and for this one it's menu 2. So I'm going to say if the menu ID is equal to menu 1, then that means we clicked something in the first menu in slash tutorial 2. So how you get the actual value of the selected thing, this is going to be another thing where we have to use the insert code. because normally you would go into the menus category and use this value block to see what value is chosen, but this unfortunately only works in text commands. So for slash commands, we're going to use the interaction reply. So you can just go to the slash command and use this interaction reply again, since this is a slash command is received event. So if you want to reply to the menu, you have to use this block instead of using this block. So basically, when you're using slash commands, you just have to ignore anything that's in the menus category. The only thing you would use are these things to actually create the menu, but anything that's here to actually handle the menu and add functionality to the menu, you can't use any of these in slash commands. But if you want to use them in text commands, again, I have another tutorial for that in the description to watch. So we're going to reply the text. So we're going to go to other again and use the same insert code block and make sure it's the circle one again and insert it into the text here. And we're going to have quotes since this is a string, because whatever is inside here is supposed to be in quotes because it's a text. Like usually if you just have like a normal text block in here, this is how you're supposed to do it, like we did over here. It automatically adds the quotes, so you see here, to indicate that the quotes are already added. But if you want to do an insert code block, you basically have to do everything manually. So we're gonna have to manually insert those quotations. So inside the quotation marks, we're gonna have you selected the value, and this is also a kind of advanced thing. So we're gonna have a space in here, and then outside of the quotation marks, we're gonna have a space and a plus sign. And after the plus sign, you're gonna have another space, and we're gonna say interaction dot values, and then we're gonna have a little square bracket, whatever you call these. It's kind of above the enter key, these kind of square brackets here. So you're gonna want to have an opening square bracket, and you're gonna type 0 and then the closing square bracket. So what this is basically doing is the text in the quotation marks, that's called a string. So this is the text that will show, and then we're adding to that text interactions.values 0, which this will be replaced by whatever the value is selected. And by the way, the value will only return the value that's set in the option. So this will return the ID of whatever is chosen. So this won't return the label or the description or anything. This will return the ID. So if you're using menus, you probably want something where something different happens depending on what option you choose. So for that, you would have an if statement and have an equal sign, and you would have another one of these insert code blocks, and it's just going to be interaction dot values and then the square bracket 0 and close the bracket. So whatever value is selected, this will be replaced by the ID of that option that the user selected. And then you can check the ID if that's equal to whatever ID is chosen here. So menu 1, option 3, 2, or 1. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to have it return the ID. So I'm just going to have it reply the ID of whatever we selected. So it's going to say you selected the value, and then after that, the plus sign basically adds this to the string. So the output will be you selected the value, and then whatever the value is for the interaction. And I'm gonna set the ephemeral to false, and it's not gonna have any rows. And now we're basically done with the code. So all of the code that we did in summary, I'm just gonna explain in a minute or two, just if you're confused about anything, to make it a little easier for you to understand. So when a slash command is received, when you do /tutorial1, it's gonna create 2 buttons, add those 2 buttons to a row, and the message is gonna attach that row on it, which has both of the buttons in it. And in the second subcommand, we're gonna do something similar, but instead of having a row created separately, we're gonna put the row we're going to put the menu row directly inside of the row here. So you can think of this whole thing as the whole menu, and each of these green things are one of the options that you can click. And the third subcommand is menus and buttons combined. So we have a row for the buttons, which is the button 3 and button 2, which are created here. And then we have another row, which is a variable, and we put the whole menu inside that variable. So this variable basically becomes a row itself. And then in the message, you can put the row 1 and the name of the variable you created, because the variable basically becomes a row because you're setting the variable to a row. And then when one of the buttons are clicked, it's going to check to see if the button ID is button 1. Then it's going to reply, you just clicked button 1. But if it's not button 1, then it's going to check to see if it's button 3. And then it's going to say you just clicked button 3, and I actually have to fix that text. And finally, when someone clicks a menu, it's going to check to see if the ID of the menu is equal to menu 1, because the ID of the menu that we set here is menu 1, and it's going to reply you selected the value and then whatever value we selected. So it's going to return one of these 3 values. And we actually also need another if statement for that to check for the second menu, which is menu 2. And for the menu 2, I'm just going to else if statement here and duplicate this. So change the menu ID to the menu 2 and also duplicate this here. And I'm going to change the text just slightly for this one, just to show you that the texts are different, just to prove that they run different portions of the code. So I'm going to say this one is the selected value is whatever value is selected. So if you click the menu 1, it will say you selected the value, and if you click menu 2, it will say selected value. And now we're done with the code, so you can download the code here. If you press this download button, it's going to download a copy of the code, and you can use whatever host you want to run the code. Again, I have more detailed descriptions on how to host a Discord bot and everything in the description. So I'm just going to download and run the code. And also, if you haven't already, make sure to have this block and put your bot token in here before you download the code. So I'm going to use a platform called Replit to host my bot. If you don't know how to use Replit, I recommend you check out the description below. But keep in mind, if you don't already know, Replit actually removed their feature to host your bot 24/7 for free. So unfortunately, you cannot host your bot for 24/7 for free anymore. So I'm actually using a different host that keeps my bot online 24/7. So if you need a host, let me know if you want to see a video like that, and maybe I'll create a tutorial on how to host a Discord bot on the new host. So for Replit, I'm just hosting it temporarily right now, but it only works if you have the project manually running. So when you close out of it, the bot will go offline, so you can't have it 24/7 anymore. So let me know in the comments down below if you want to see a tutorial on another way to host your Discord bot without Replit. So you can see the bot is online now, and if I do /, then if you go over to the bot, you can see I have 3 commands, tutorial 1, 2, and 3. And if we run /tutorial 1, it will send a message with a button and another button. And you can see in the code, that's exactly what we wanted to do. Button 1 is Blurple, and it has this emoji with the label. And there's another button, button 2, with this emoji, and it's a link. So when we click on this button 2, it'll lead us to google.com, and if you click visit site, it'll just lead you to google.com. And if you click on button 1, then it'll reply you just clicked button 1, because that's what we told it to do over here. And then if we run the second command /tutorial 2, then it'll send a menu, and it's ephemeral because in the second subcommand we did make it ephemeral just to show you what ephemeral looks like. So if you select an item from the menu, if I select option 1, you can see it sends an error. So I actually made a mistake here. So instead of interaction.id, it's going to be interaction.customID instead. So just replace wherever you put interaction.id, make it interaction.customID. So after fixing that, now if I run /tutorial 2, then it sends a menu, and if you click on option 1, then it'll say you selected the value menu 1 option 1, and that's because we told it to reply you selected the value and then whatever value they selected. And like I said earlier, this is not the label or anything, this is actually the ID of the option. And if you select option 2, it'll say menu 1 option 2, and option 3 will say menu 1 option 3. And lastly, if we do /tutorial3, which is both of the components combined, then it'll have button 1, and if you click button 1, it'll say you just clicked button 3. And if you click on button 2, again, it'll lead to google.com, and it also has the same menu as before, so when you click on an option, it'll say the value of whatever option you choose. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If this tutorial was helpful to you, make sure to drop a like on the video and consider subscribing for more tutorials like this one. If you need any support or want to show off your creations to other people, or if you just want to be a part of the community, make sure to join my Discord server Millions World. The invite link will be in the description down below. And again, since Replit doesn't work anymore for free users, let me know in the comments if you want to see a tutorial that shows a new type of host that you can use to have your bot online 24/7 for free. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you on the next one.